the piracy issue is the Malacca right over here, which I talk about in a few minutes. As the United States gradually departs its military adventure in Afghanistan and Iraq, American presence in the Pacific and Indian Ocean has expanded to include Australia, especially Darwin's and Cocos Island, and military is being presence through Australian defence forces. This in addition to Diego Garcia at the heart of the Indian Ocean here. Indian Ocean has a Diego Garcia Air and Naval Space Station, which the USS Enterprise often visited, and also stations there. And during the war in Iraq, all the military sorties were flown from this ship. Since the signing of Indo-American Nuclear Treaty in 2008, India's friendly relations with the US have soared to the new height. The noise and perception of Indian power was recently amplified when New Delhi successfully launched a long-range missile test with freshly acquired American nuclear technology and know-how. China downplayed the importance of the great test, nuclear test by India. China downplayed the whole thing, even though the Agni-5 intercontinental ballistic missiles could reach Beijing from here. Actually, they were tested in Andaman Island right here, this part of India. It can reach all the way to China. While India and America, as the world's largest and most powerful democracies, develop mutual respect and greater bilateral relations, Sri Lanka maintained its traditional friendly partnership with a powerful neighbor. Their trade relation and investment initiative have been increasing since the signing of the Indo-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement. The post-Colombo construction efforts and the development project have helped the affected areas in the north and the northeastern province, Jaffna, Batticaloa and Trincomalee. Despite all this, Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh gently reminded President Rajapaksa that we can choose our friends, but we cannot choose our neighbors, which essentially he sent a very subtle, hidden message to Colombo. Considering Sri Lanka's enhanced partnership with China, New Delhi holds that countries in South Asia, particularly Bangladesh, Burma, Maldives, Pakistan and Sri Lanka, are being used by China to concircle. Concircle is a new word I created. Concircle means containment and circle. Containment, around, and circle. Concircle, India, and limit the Indian sphere of influence. To counterbalance Chinese confluence, India has engaged in two primary projects. So India is not waiting. India wants to counterbalance to China. What they do, they have primarily two things going on. One is the Setu Samudram ship canal project in the Foki Strait, which I will come in shortly. Another one is the Trincomalee harbour in the eastern coast of Sri Lanka. India views Beijing as a rising maritime trading power, as seeking once again project force across the Indian Ocean like Admiral Cheng He, remember that admiral we talked about earlier, illustrates some 600 years ago during the Ming Dynasty or the Corte regime at that time. Sri Lanka lies in the midst of this strategic geopolitical competition and geo-economic cooperation, acting if trade leads to peace. You have to remember there are two things happening at the same time. One is geopolitical competition, ideologically political competition going on. At the same time, there is economic operations. With those two projects, the first one is Setu Samudram's ship canal project was initially conceived in 1860 by British Commander A.D. Taylor of the Indian Marines to reduce the cost and time navigating around Sri Lanka. If we can reduce that 36 hours to, they can reduce the hours to 36 by moving ships through India and Sri Lanka rather than going around Sri Lanka. The BJP party, the Hindu Nationalist Party, initially opposed the dredging of the Ramma Setu, a mythological bridge built by Lord Rama in the Fox Strait. You probably know in Sri Lanka's history, Rama and Sita story. That goes back to that mythical story. Indian Supreme Court dismissed that BJP party's case. At the launch of the project in 2005, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said, "I hope this project will benefit not only us, but also our neighbours." As the construction advances, debate still continues in few areas. Primary concern is this project is environmental damage, as the sediment and toxin negatively affect the biological domain around Sri Lanka near the Jaffna Peninsula and Talaimannaram. Other one is the food security is also contested issue, as most people living in the coastal areas, especially these areas around Jaffna, their livelihood depend largely on small scale fishing for their livelihood. I think my friend Asanka can testify because he once did head of the port authorities in Sri Lanka, and these issues were there in the small farms, small fishermen. Most importantly, India-centric bilateral tension and multilateral issues came to the forefront of the strategic concerns, particularly two things. One is the possible re-emergence of sectarian struggle between Tamils in Sri Lanka and the Tamil Nadu state, the neighboring state of Sri Lanka, which would create instability and chaos in government, which we experienced last 30 plus years ago of the Ilam War. And the second one is favorable Chinese-centric view in Sri Lanka related to Hambantota Harbour project and the Lotus Tower telecommunication center in Colombo may possibly turn the island into an opposition and civil unrest like in Burma. Then the second project that India is concerned with, it is Trincomalee Harbour, which has been elusive kind of dilemma. For centuries, the deep natural harbour has been considered the best port for commercial and military purposes. British Admiral Hirato Nelson characterized Trincomalee as the finest harbour in the world. In 1947, Prime Minister D.S. Siranayaka signed a defence treaty with British as a precondition to our independence, which allowed the use of Trincomalee and Katunayaka as a naval and air bases to keep India at bay. Because when the British left, there was a fear in Sri Lanka soon after the independence that India might come take over Sri Lanka, because at that time there was a lot of tension in East Pakistan and West Pakistan soon after the independence. So there was a fear by the Sri Lankan leaders. But during the nationalization effort, Prime Minister S.W.R.D. Bandaranayake asked the British to leave these bases in 1957. You remember Mr. Bandaranayake nationalized tea estate, insurance companies, and banking and everything. So that at the same time they asked the British to leave in these ports and bases. And the fearful of India, as the Elam War began in 1983, President J.R. Jayawardene in 1985 reminded British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher that 1947 Defence Pact had not formally been abrogated. It is still in place. When President Jayawardene and Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi signed the 1987 Indo-Sri Lanka Indian Peacekeeping Forces IPKF Accord, it was appended that Trincomalee or any other port may not be used by foreign military, which would be detriment to India. It was a number of letters went back by between the J.R. Jayawardene and Rajiv Gandhi of India. This mutual understanding continued despite the fact that 1947 British Sri Lanka Pact is still in place. Neither British nor American government opposed IPKF Accord, hence the balance of power changed to India's favour. The ambiguous nature is part of geopolitical gamemanship, as British and American ships occasionally call onto the harbours for refueling and repair. The ambiguous and mysterious nature of this strategic and defence relationship was dispelled when US and Sri Lanka signed the Acquisition and Cost Servicing Agreement, which is known as ACSA, by the Defence Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa and the US Ambassador Robert Blake in 2007, which fall under the jurisdiction of the Pentagon in the United States. The 10-year pact provides the framework for increased interoperability, transfer and exchange logistical supplies. It supports refueling services during peacekeeping missions and humanitarian operations. Joint exercises allow the use of ports, airports and airspace. Such agreements are not uncommon, as the United States has ACSAs with 90 other countries to protect and promote global trade relations.